Hi, welcome to the Trauma Thrivers podcast. Delighted to have you with us. I'm Lula Bentz, your host, a psychotherapist, a trauma expert, and a survivor myself. Lovely to have you with us. The Trauma Thrivers podcast is for anybody who has been through any sort of developmental trauma or who has complex PTSD. This podcast aims to help educate, inspire, and support those of us that are on a trauma healing journey. We've got stories, steps, and various solutions to trauma to help you heal. If you'd like more information or tips or tools or strategies, please go to traumathrivers.com. You can also find this podcast on my YouTube channel, Lula Bentz Trauma Thrivers. If you'd like to join our community of thrivers, please find us on Facebook under Trauma Thrivers. Thank you so much for this month's sponsors, who are Silkworth Lodge in Jersey. Silkworth provide residential treatment for people with alcohol or drug addiction, alongside Silkworms, their support programme for children aged 7 to 12 affected by the addiction of a family member. They've also got a new 13 to 18-year-old adolescent service. Silkworth provide real end-to-end support to all of those affected by substance misuse. So for more details, please go to silkworthlodge.co.uk. I really hope you're going to get lots out of this episode. Hey, welcome to the Trauma Thrivers podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. I'm Lula Bentz, the host of the podcast, and today I'm really excited to introduce you to JohnPaul Davies. And let me just tell you a little bit about JohnPaul before we start. He's an experienced and an accredited psychotherapist and counsellor and coach running a busy full-time practice in Cobham in Surrey in the UK. His website is thistrustedplace.co.uk, and he's got an interesting background. He worked as a solicitor for the first half of his career in the City of London, and he's recently published a book which looks amazing, and I'm in the middle of reading, called Finding a Balanced Connection, which is available on amazon.co.uk. JohnPaul also writes for a lot of media outlets and websites and magazines, and is currently a spokesperson for the UKCP, which is the governing body, or one of them, of accredited therapists in the UK. So I'm really delighted to introduce you today to JohnPaul. Thank you so much, JohnPaul, for joining us today. I'm really delighted. And I know that we've been following each other for a while on Instagram, and I've been inspired by what you do. So originally, I really wanted to talk to you about compassion-focused therapy. But before we do that, can you just tell me how you got into the therapy world? What led you into this career?
Well, I was a solicitor. I worked in the City of London for 10 years actually, and then I was in therapy for a couple of years towards the end of that, and during that period, during therapy, I was actually at a stage of my career where I'd been an assistant solicitor and then became a senior solicitor, and it was the expectation next was to become a partner, which requires a huge amount more actually in terms of time commitment and that kind of thing. And I just had my daughter, so there was quite a tension between the amount of time that I was spending at work and what I wanted to do in terms of life outside of work. So what I decided to do at that point was to take a career break, and I did a screenwriting course.
Wow.
I did some voluntary work on a phone line, and I also did a foundation year in counselling and psychotherapy. I did it at the place because I had to do my career break from January to December. So I did it at CCP actually because my therapist was a tutor there, and because it ran the course, that foundation course ran from that year, unlike a lot of the university who are at September start. So yeah, I did that year. I enjoyed the screenwriting, I enjoyed the voluntary work, but the thing I enjoyed most was the was the foundation year. So I did actually, to help with the transition, because then I wanted to go on and do the diploma, a 4-year part-time diploma. To help with the transition, I did ask the law firm whether I could go back part-time, but this was, gosh, 12, 13 or more than that, 14, 15 years ago. And it was, men doing part-time work wasn't really something that they were open to. So I just continued. I did everything as quickly as I could in terms of my placements. And yeah, and here I am.
Wow. And for those people that are listening that maybe aren't London based, CCPE is a training organisation in West London, would we call it West London?
Yeah, so Little Venice, Paddington, that area. So it's really lovely. It's on the canal. Yeah.
And in terms of modalities studied there, is it transpersonal that you study?
Yes, it's an integrative course. So they teach a bit, psychoanalysis, CBT, existential, various, and they also have a transpersonal focus for things too, which would be that more spiritual aspect of people. So they incorporate some things from Eastern religions and Western. So so if they're going to do psychoanalysis, they'll try and connect it with the transpersonal as well.
Lovely. And did that lead you down the path to more compassion focused work?
Well, it's interesting because compassion focused therapy wasn't really that we learned on the course, even though it was an integrative, have been included as something that was on the curriculum. But I suppose through a spiritual context, I would have heard the word compassion. Well, actually, the reason I would have heard the word compassion years before is when they were talking about I remember people saying about the Conservative government not compassionate enough. Yeah. So I didn't know what compassion meant. And one of the reasons that I read the first book that I did about compassion was for 2 reasons. It was a book on mindfulness. This was in my 3rd year of training. And there's a book called The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. So I think, is it Patrick Germer? And so that incorporated both mindfulness, which I was interested in then, and also the compassion element of it. And then I sort of incorporated that, compassion means loving kindness from that point. That was the understanding that I got of it. And then because I did some of the compassionate mindfulness, I saw there was a book on compassion-focused therapy. I think it's Paul Gilbert's book. And I read that. So, and it really, as I say, it was about the 3rd year of my training, and the model that he had in that, and also some of the ways, therefore, in which he suggested working with it, really stuck with me ever since, actually. So those ideas I started to use in therapy, and then it all fed into each other, the things that clients would say and was helpful, sort of all built a model, really based on compassion-focused therapy, which I then wrote about in the book.
Okay. So for the people listening that aren't quite sure what compassion-focused therapy means, or if they went to see somebody who was more compassion-focused in their approach, what could they expect to get, if you like, in terms of therapist interventions or ways or methods or models?
Okay. I mean, I read the book. I haven't done a separate course on it. So this is from the point of view of taking in the basic model, I suppose, and then applying it to the work. So some of the things that I'll talk about and do use are ones that I've seen since were set out in his book, but other things are probably bits and pieces from other modalities, which seem to fit with it. So, I mean, the basic model, my understanding of it is each human being is made up of sort of 3 main parts. The first one would be the threat part, which is the problem-focused part where fear sits. Also anger, because fear, if we're frightened, we that's a sort of protective emotion. So we may get angry, the sort of fight or flight or freeze type responses. Yeah. So that place, because it's about fear, potentially anger, or freeze, so shutting off, shutting down, is actually a place of disconnection. Yeah. And so there's that part, which is actually one of the main ones that's going to dominate our experience, on the basis that we are programmed to survive, and therefore identify problems rather than be happy.
Yes, totally.
So there's that threat part, and then the middle one is reward. I think he calls it drive, but
Okay.
rewards and drives. So the things
Yeah.
that we get dopamine for, all those kind of feel-good chemicals. So
Yeah.
eating, sex, acquiring material possessions, competing and winning, achieving goals.
Wow. Okay.
Those kind of things. So that's where sort of addictive behaviour would lie.
Right.
And then the third part, which is where the compassion is, would be the I call it connection. In the book title, Finding a Balanced Connection, it would be the connection part of that. I think he may use a different word for it, but it's the part that's fundamentally about love of self and love of others, affiliation, friendship, part of a team, teamwork, working in harmony, forgiveness, patience, all those kind of things, which really I think is where happiness sits for human beings.
Totally.
The difficulty, as I say, that human beings have, I think, is we can only be in one part at a time, and being naturally problem focused, and perhaps growing up in environments, and certainly where there have been traumatizing experiences, the bit that gets most energy is the disconnecting part, which is the threat part. Right. And it's really important to say that we need that a bit. It is the health and safety bit. It does take care of us physically, or people that we love, takes care of them physically, and also potentially psychologically. If we're consistently anxious or irritated in relation to somebody because of behavior it's important that we do listen to that and potentially act on it. The trouble is, for a lot of us, I think, if we're growing up in an environment which was traumatizing, that's really got all of the energy, and life is really much more about survival rather than the place of thriving, which would be connected with self and others. So I think the basic premise of the book is that it's completely understandable that naturally people will be, dominated potentially by threat. Most of us then try to help ourselves to feel better because we don't like to feel switched off, frightened or angry.
No.
So we try and change that state, and the quickest to hand ways to do that, often the reward drives. So food, alcohol, drugs, sex, more money, competing with other people and feeling better than, or whatever it might be. And we may bounce backwards and forwards between those two. So because actually, the reward stuff, if that dominates at times as well, can disconnect us from other people. Addictive behavior will do that for people. So it makes us more anxious, which means we go more to it. And a lot of people get caught bouncing between the two. So what compassion-focused therapy wants to do is to focus on that connection part, as I say, both with self, but also with other people, and put the energy, thought, feeling, and behavioural energy into that part.
Wow. Okay, that makes complete sense to me.
Great.
Also, because the first two steps of my program that I'm in the middle of writing are step one is from threat to trust.
Right. Yeah.
And step two is from hedonistic to healthy.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah. So because we recognize, don't we, as therapists, and also as a trauma survivor myself too, that you can't connect when you're threatened, and you can't connect when you're high on something. And, surely our basic premise or underlying is we're desperate for connection, aren't we?
Yes.
As human beings.
Yes. And if you were to ask people, if I do a sort of emotional needs inventory with people. And so that is going through basic needs. And before I do that, I say, look, what would your basic emotional need be? And most people say is to love and be loved, which would be about connection. I think the difficulty that a lot of people have is that they will have grown up in environments that they would have been told are loving, or that people love them, and this is what love looks like. But actually, if you look at what the behaviours were, or certain things that had happened, there may have been very little about it that was loving, which means that we can then perpetuate that throughout our adult relationships, and continue in this sort of cycle of bouncing up and backwards and forwards between threat and reward. So So you work on the needs, and you get them to describe their needs. Is there anything else, JohnPaul, that you do
kind of systematically in your approach to try and move people out of those two areas and into connection.
Yeah, definitely. The thing, I mean, I've been doing some writing, as you know, for various things. I've noticed.
I want to talk about this next, please.
Yeah,
that would be great.
But also writing for articles and things, and it's so interesting because when journalists tend to ask for comments on things, it will tend to be, you know, about anxiety, or it could be about body dysmorphia, or about anger, or there's a lot of focus in what we're talking about on, and which is incredibly helpful, but how to manage anxious thoughts, or how to manage anger. And I've noticed there seems to be much less of a focus on actually how to turn up the part that's about connection. Now, if you are turning down fear and anger, and then it will make more space for the potential and capacity to connect with self and others. But I would go for much more of an active putting energy into those things, and as I say, thought, feeling, and behavioral energy. And I suppose connection, you can sort of divide into connection with self and connection with others. And I do think connection with others is very difficult, or much more difficult, if we don't have a connection with self. Because if I talk about connection with a client, they might often say, oh, I know I need to be around more people, or I know I need more friends. But I think the step before that, you know, who is it that's going into relationship with people? How do I know? Who do I enjoy being around? You know, who is my tribe? Who do I feel good around? And unless we have sufficient connection with self, that I know when I feel good and when I don't feel good, it's very difficult to make decisions. For example, I mean, it's difficult to make decisions as to what career I might want, and also who I want to be around. So the first place I would start, I think, is building that connection with self. You might call it love of self. So what I think, if we've been in threat for a long time, traumatized people, we tend to, as I say, look at, it's a lot of fear in imagination. So it's either identifying problems that may be there, or imagining problems. And that lens is focused on us as well. So people will rarely have a grounded sense of their own worth and value. You know, this not good enough is because people have spent so many years, I think, with the problem focus when looking at themselves, whether that's about personality or their body, or, you know, whatever aspect of themselves it is. They might believe they're less interesting than other people, or somehow, you know, don't do life as well as other people. And I think it's because that threat lens turned on self is only critical. That's, I suppose, if we're up in the sort of fear and anxiety. And of course, another response to threat is to switch off completely, the sort of hopeless and helpless. And again, that does not give somebody a great sense of self and who they are. So, you know, one of the important things that I would do is look at, as I say, grounding that sense of worth and value, you know, based on really somebody's history and what they've achieved through life. Very, very few of us will spend time looking back and seeing, you know, despite things having been made more difficult by traumatizing experiences, most people still do incredible things. And, you know, even to have got through life and to sustain relationships and a job, having been through that experience, you know, traumatizing experiences is amazing. So things like timeline of achievements, I think, is incredibly important to look at. I think that day to day, you know, if something goes well, even if it's seemingly small, what happened, to reflect afterwards and say to ourselves, you know, it's that inner dialogue, isn't it? You know, well done for doing that. Or the fact you were able to meet that deadline means that, you know, you can organize things, good communication skills, planning, you know, all of these things. You know, they're not necessarily what somebody will have been saying to themselves on an ongoing basis if there's been a traumatizing past. And the other aspect of that, I think, is it can make us overly reliant on other people's input and comments. So if I don't know who I am, and my own worth and value, it makes me very porous to somebody else being critical or dismissive, or whatever it might be. So I think I think the most important place to start is with that sense of actually being able to describe who I am. Lots of people, you know, will have sustained long-term relationships, had various jobs, be going out and doing various things, seeing lots of people. But if I ask the question, who are you? Some people just don't have an answer to that. It's a complete blank. And they'll be able to, because I think the vigilance, the hypervigilance to others of that threat part, know lots and lots about other people and be able to say, well, my partner is X, Y, and Z. And I know in that situation they would do this. And I know that that's what they like and that's what they're interested in. But they don't necessarily have those answers themselves, because it's not, threat is not a place going inside. It is a place of often looking out here, and when it does go inside, it's to find a problem. So so there's that, I suppose, that sort of timeline of achievements things, more the cognitive side of things. The other thing, which is of so much importance, is the connection between with the body and feelings.
Yes.
Because again, in both the threat state, the importance of what I'm feeling from a moment to moment basis, whether I like something or not, or whether I think this is fun or really enjoy it, it's of very little importance at all. What's important is survival, isn't it? Rather than actually my own needs and wants. What would dominate everything is survival. So what that means is, I think over time people lose their connection with their felt experience, and therefore their body, feelings being felt within the body. So
in both positions, whether it's threat or reward, both of them are a complete disconnect, aren't they, from the body?
Completely. Because often with reward, if you're talking about alcohol, for example, whilst people are taking the substance or bringing the substance in, that will be altering their felt state of something, probably calming them down. And then whilst their body craves the next time that they use it, they will be, I suppose, anxious or irritable. So the whole time our perception of our world and ourselves is being distorted by the need for the substance, either the use of the substance or the need for the substance. So
depending on whether, and I think this is an interesting one, and whether we want to, depress something or activate something. So often I find if people are in hypoarousal and disconnected, they'll go for the uppers or the stimulants. And when they're in hyper, they want to go for the depressants so that they can calm down. So we just get used to medicating that nervous system all the time. And that threat and reward cycle, we're in it and still disconnected from the body. So how do you work at that reconnection piece? Because you're right, that is such a vital part of the journey.
If we want to, I mean, there's two things. If we want the signals from our feelings to know what decisions to make and where to go and what choices to make in life, we have to know what we're feeling. And very importantly, not just because often if somebody comes in with anxiety or anger, it's those feelings that they might identify and remember during the week. But perhaps even more importantly, in some ways, what are the times when we're happy about something, we're excited about it, because those are the times as well that we want to lean into and make bigger. So I would always suggest, I mean, there are apps like Insight Timer, which do mindfulness meditation, and they do the body scan type. So I know a lot of therapists during therapy will take people through a body scan potentially themselves. I don't tend to do that often, because I quite like Insight Timer for that kind of thing, because there's thousands of people, every voice, every accent, every length of time under the sun, and people can choose the thing that works for them. But certainly that would be a primary thing, the sort of body scan. So starting from the big toe and working your way up through the body. Some people in terms of chakras, for example, going internally, they work from a part of the body up. So it's all about connecting the brain with what's happening within the body. So I think mindfulness meditation is really good for that.
I agree. The one caveat I suppose I would say on that is often my clients, if they're severely traumatized, can't feel safe enough anywhere in their body yet to do any mindfulness or meditation.
Yes. I mean, I would also, one thing, I did some EMDR training, and the thing that I do regularly use now from that with a number of clients would be a safe place type visualization. Well, two actually. There's the safe place visualization, to imagine a safe place, either a place that they've been or something completely. So we'll remember a place that they've been or somewhere in imagination. But I think they also have a sort of I can't remember how it's described, but a time that the person felt very competent and confident in life. And that was it, because a number of people might feel that imposter syndrome type thing, the way that threat manifests.
It's quite similar to your achievements exercise, in that, you know, a lot of EMDR and a lot of therapy, I think, is about installing resources, isn't it, and resilience. So you know, there's a whole book of Laurel Parnell's called Tapping In, which is basically just a whole book about tapping in resources, and somebody can butterfly hug and just tap on their shoulders as they're thinking about their achievements. You know, so your achievements exercise, and let's go through, I mean, often with clients, I'll go through their top 10 memories, you know, and then we'll tap them in, and where do you feel that in your body? Because at least if we can start to get a felt sense of the good stuff, you know, we're on to something then.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's hugely so, you know, valuable, that is. I think I was listening to a podcast, Dr. Rick Hanson. Do you know, I think he talks about positive psychology, because I know that there can be this belief, which I completely understand, which is, you know, that you can bypass the distress and somehow let's all be positive about it and think about the great things and look on the bright side. But that's not what this is about. Of course, the, you know, the
trauma
anxiety stuff is looking at that, and the addictive cycles and how they work and how to short circuit them. But I just think it's putting equal focus on the resourcing, on how I make myself feel safe, on the things I wouldn't change about my life now, on the things I wouldn't change about myself. You know, that gratitude practice can be incredibly powerful too. One of the things about connecting with the body is, I think, when there has been that threat place has dominated, and also with reward and the addictions, people's relationship with their body becomes very disconnected. Certainly not even necessarily feeling it, but, you know, with reward, it's really getting used to somehow meet the addictive cycle. And usually in the, you know, the threat place of anger and fear, that it's looking at every potential problem with it, and, you know, can even be discussed. You know, it goes into body dysmorphia. And so I think it's so important to be able to you know, appreciate what's going on with the body every moment, in terms of breathing, digestion, oxygen traveling around. You know, all those things are all happening. But as you say, you know, to go internally for some people initially is going to be very difficult.
Which is, I think, again, the reasons why you're talking about them getting to connection, and I suppose I talk about them being in their adult or grounded state, or, you know, in polyvagal terms, I suppose we call it their ventral vagal now, so that they feel relaxed and connected as much of the time, and we start to work from there. You know, I think sometimes in the old days, I don't know, this is just a sense I have, that, you know, coaching was about focusing on the resources and what works and the here and now and the kind of future stuff. And therapy was, you know, you lie on a couch and all you do is talk about your past and your problems.
Right.
And that's not really how it works, is it?
No.
You know, these days, like, you know, we work through time, and actually us therapists don't just stay in the past, and we do work with the present and the future, and we do work on what you're really good at. You know, not just looking at the problems and the trauma.
Right. It's incredible. The thing I was going to say about that Dr. Rick Hanson actually is which really stayed with me as well after, it's just a small thing he said, which is when something good happens, and you know, you need to know that and I mean that the body feels good at that point. So it's a feeling of love or excitement, or he said, you've got to make it bigger. Try and stay with it for at least 20 seconds, which I quite like, because with, of course, moments of anxiety or anger, or we don't have to try at all for those things to remain for, you know, hours. With anger, we can argue in our heads for days about something, can't we? And that seems to be not something we have to make much of an effort to do. But the thing that he was pointing out, that if you consciously, when something good happens in life, even if it might be a relatively rare thing, or thinking about things in the past where we felt good, to try and really lean into them and make them bigger. And the way he says that is also by focusing on the feeling in the body and making that feeling in the body bigger as well, because
lovely.
it's a very helpful thing.
I think that's really helpful. And I remember, I can't remember who it was that said it once, it was years ago, that, you know, the brain and or the mind and the body is a bit like Teflon for good memories and Velcro for not.
Yes. That was in my book, but the editor took it out.
Was it? Oh, was it? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know whether anybody that's younger than a certain age even knows what Velcro is.
Maybe that's why. That's why.
Yeah, for those of you listening that have got no idea what Velcro is, it's a sticky thing that you used to put on the bottom of things to pin it up instead of sewing it. There you go. Just in case you've got some American people listening that go, Velcro? What the hell's Velcro? Yeah, so that's really good. So you put all of that basically in your book, Finding a Balanced Connection.
Yeah.
So is that all of your insights really over your, 14, 15 years now as a therapist?
It is, yeah. I mean, so it comes from working with clients, my own process, of course. I mean, the thing about all this, isn't it, is how that's the wonderful thing. You know, many times clients will say things, I think, oh gosh, that's, you know, there are a few things in there. My clients have some of them have read the book, and they will say, I remember saying that thing. You know, that's the one. Is it all feeds into each other in terms of connection?
Yes.
So it sort of starts with that connection with self, and then works its way through towards the end of it's 10 principles really, and the early ones are about connection with self, and then it works through to connection with other people as well. Because I suppose, you know, an important thing, isn't it, is when there has been trauma in life, and is that it can make other relationships with other people very difficult.
Extremely difficult. Yeah. So, I mean, some of mine, so much so that they have literally no connections and are completely avoidant. You know, that kind of deprivation of relationships really, which is sad.
Yes, because then we don't get the kind of mirroring back of worth and value that other people can bring. And but I do think the first thing to look at is relationship with self primarily, because it is, I mean, it can be done outward in, inward out, top down. You know, there are a number of different ways to do it, but certainly, as I say, I do think it's important to be going out to the world and making connections and friendships, knowing who we are, and being able to regulate ourselves, and knowing what our coping mechanisms are, and bringing some more tools in if, as is usually the case, the coping mechanisms which we've seen have not necessarily been, they worked for then, but now they don't anymore. So
Okay. What else for you now? You've written this book, so you know, who's it for really? Who would you say primarily you wrote it for?
I think it's more for clients, isn't it?
Yes.
There are a number of therapists that I know that have read it and find it very helpful, and they've recommended it to clients. I did have one client come in and say that their partner was reading a self-help book, which was recommended by their therapist, which they found very helpful, and they said it was that one, my one. So
brilliant.
So a therapist had read it who liked it, and then recommended it to their client, as I say. So it's, you know, it covers, because I think threat, if that's been dominant, one of the, you know, the symptoms of that would be people being diagnosed with anxiety, because that would be the fear part. Chronic anger, because again, usually there's anger is over fear often for people. Depression, because being in threat for a long, you know, as we've talked about, people get under aroused or hypo aroused.
And then adrenals just get wiped out, and, you know, adrenal fatigue and cortisol and all the rest of it. It's very depleting after a long time, isn't it, in that?
Yes. And then the addictive behavior as well. So the rewards. So it, you know, it does cover, because I think the roots of lots of things, you know, the sort of feeling lost, difficulty in relationship, body dysmorphia, anorexia, you know, they have similar roots for all of them. So it's really for most people who suffer some kind of psychological distress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you call it trauma? Do you believe that lots of things have come from significant emotional events or situations in childhood that were less than nurturing?
Yes, I mean, I would use the word trauma quite a lot, actually,
Yes.
to reflect back to clients
Yes.
the significance of what they've gone through. Because as you know, for a lot of us, it's our normal, isn't it? That's what we knew. So it's only really perhaps looking back, or also seeing in somebody reflected in somebody else's expression, whether that's a therapist, and in language like trauma, that people can see that actually what they went through had a profound effect on how they experience themselves and the world. And I remember somebody saying that trauma in relationships is betrayal. So the betrayal is traumatizing, and so it would be a principle I would use a lot, and would definitely use that phrase.
And I suppose the stance of the compassion focused work is when we as therapists realize that those that come to see us more often than not have been betrayed in relationships and therefore are under threat and even find us threatening, and our stance has to be even more compassionate.
Yes, absolutely. And of course we have that part in us as well. That's the anxious safety seeking part. So if somebody sits more in fear and they're therefore looking for soothing more often, I do think that's easier than somebody who potentially sits in anger a lot.
Yes.
Because we have our own amygdala that can get triggered by those kinds of experiences. So for therapists, making sure when you were talking about hyper-aroused or hypo-arousal, I quite like. It was what somebody talked about in. It was on an Insight Time, a talk about yoga actually, and that they just said in that context, what yoga does is keep us in a calm and alive state.
Yes.
So I really like that as an idea for people, both as making sure as a therapist that I'm able to do that as often as I can, but also for clients too. So it's that sort of middle band where, because a lot of people talk about calmness, but not necessarily about the aliveness. And it's what you were saying in terms of some of the substances that people take in aren't just to calm them down, they're also to bring them up. So that calm and alive state is, I think, the place where we have an expansive view of ourselves and other people and are happiest. So maintaining that for therapists as well as helping our clients to do that, I think, is incredibly important.
And that's a lovely point to kind of almost end on and ask you is what do you do to keep yourself, I suppose, in that place and in that window of tolerance and in that connection place? And what tips? And because I mean, lots of my clients use things like yoga or trauma-informed yoga, as you were saying, or good nutrition or exercise or walking, out with the dog. But is there anything that you find particularly helpful for you?
I do. I think, those things that you've described, particularly walking, I would say around here, if you're looking at that calm and alive state, one of the great things about nature, I think, not necessarily always calm, but it's the aliveness to it, isn't it? And the fact it's always changing, and that after every season has its own beautiful aspects, and something will always come through again after winter, and you can see growth. And so for me, nature is hugely important. Going for a walk in nature. I do also, I wouldn't underestimate that sort of gratitude practice. So each day I do find calming to reflect on the day and think, what are the things that I'm grateful for, even if things that weren't that great happened. There'll always be something. There'll always be something that I can think of. So I like that. And yes, music as well for me. I will definitely get both calmness but aliveness from music. Physical movement's a big thing, isn't it? In terms of the body.
Totally. Do you have a dog or any animals that you walk?
No, unfortunately, I've got allergies in the house, so including my own. So love dogs, but
you could try a cockapoo because apparently they're non-allergenic.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I've got one. But not that I've got allergies, but I have been told that cockapoos are non-allergenic because they don't molt and they don't, but they are slightly mad.
Well, madness is
is.
aliveness, isn't it? That's a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, JohnPaul, thank you. It's delightful really to speak to you today and meet you, and thank you for your time, and can't wait to properly finish this, and I hope some of the audience today will read it as well, and we'll be ready and waiting for your next one. What's next on the cards for you? Do you know? Have you got any plans for a second?
There is the possibility of because the transition from solicitor to therapist, a lot of people are interested in. So thinking about that at the moment potentially, but I don't know in terms of the actual therapy itself, and maybe it's just one book for a while.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure. It's really, really lovely. And I think and hope that it's helpful to those people that are listening and watching today. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Thank you a lot.
Okay.
Take care. Look after yourself.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope it helped you in some way, and I really hope to see you back here soon. If you have anything to share on today's experience or podcast, please nip over to the YouTube channel or the Facebook group Trauma Thrivers and let us know there.